The fastest way to embarrass yourself is to mock a quiet man in front of his child. The fluorescent lights above room 214 buzzed with that cold electric hum every public school in America seemed to have after sunset, and the rows of folding chairs scraped softly against the waxed floor as parents settled in for Lincoln Elementary's quarterly conference night. Rain tapped against the tall windows facing the parking lot, blurring the orange glow of the streetlights outside, while the smell of burnt coffee drifted from a table near the back wall beside a stack of untouched store-brand cookies. Ethan Walker sat near the corner of the room with his backpack tucked between his shoes, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the floor as more parents filtered inside wearing office clothes, pressed jackets, polished boots, and expensive perfume. Then the door opened again. Daniel Walker stepped inside quietly, pulling off a faded navy work cap darkened with grease stains around the brim. His denim jacket looked worn from years of use, the sleeves slightly frayed near the wrists, and there was engine oil smeared faintly across one shoulder like he had come straight from a repair garage without stopping to change. Rainwater dripped from his boots onto the tile as several parents glanced over with quick expressions that disappeared just as fast. Daniel didn't seem to notice. He gave Ethan a small nod and rested a rough hand briefly against the boy's shoulder before taking the only empty seat near the back of the room. Mrs. Rebecca Collins looked up from her desk and paused for half a second too long. Mid-30s, blonde hair tied tightly behind her head, sharp posture, the kind of teacher who treated every classroom like a courtroom. She checked the clock on the wall, then smiled thinly enough for everyone to understand the message behind it. "Well," she said loudly, setting down her marker, "Mr. Walker finally decided to join us." A few nervous chuckles slipped through the room. Ethan's face immediately turned red. Daniel simply removed his wet jacket and folded it neatly across his lap. "Sorry," he said calmly. "Work ran late." Rebecca crossed her arms. "Yes, I imagine. Consistency can be difficult sometimes." More silence followed this time. Longer. Sharper. Ethan stared harder at the floor. Daniel remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable beneath the harsh white ceiling lights. Rebecca continued the meeting, discussing grades, student behavior, discipline, future testing, but every few minutes her attention drifted back toward Daniel like she couldn't resist it. "Children thrive on structure," she explained while pacing slowly near the whiteboard. "Especially boys. They imitate the habits they see at home." Her eyes landed directly on Ethan, then his father. That's why parental examples matter so much. The room went quiet enough for the rain outside to sound louder. Ethan swallowed hard. One mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Another parent looked away entirely. Daniel sat motionless, elbows resting lightly on his knees, hands folded together with the calm stillness of someone used to waiting without complaint. Rebecca smiled again, but this time there was something colder underneath it. "Some parents," she continued carefully, "don't realize that showing up late sends a message to their children about priorities." Ethan's breathing became shallow. He could feel the heat burning across his cheeks. He wished the floor would open beneath him. But beside him, Daniel only leaned forward slightly and spoke in the same steady tone. "You're right," he said. "Kids notice everything." Something about the way he answered made the room hesitate. Not defensive, not angry, just quiet, controlled. Rebecca seemed irritated by that more than if he had argued back. She picked up a stack of student progress reports and began handing them out one by one until she reached Ethan's folder. "Ethan is intelligent," she admitted, "but distracted lately. Withdrawn. Sometimes children struggle when stability at home becomes uncertain." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Ethan's chest tightened. Daniel accepted the folder without looking inside it. His hands were rough, scarred faintly across the knuckles, the kind built from years of physical labor. Yet he handled the papers carefully like they mattered. Then, for the briefest second, the sleeve of his flannel shirt shifted upward beneath the fluorescent light, revealing an old faded scar running along his wrist before disappearing again beneath the cuff. Across the room, a gray-haired father near the window narrowed his eyes slightly, as if he recognized something he couldn't immediately place. Daniel noticed none of it. Or maybe he noticed all of it and simply chose silence. The rain outside intensified, rattling softly against the classroom windows, while Mrs. Collins continued speaking at the front of the room with the smooth confidence of someone completely certain she controlled it. Ethan could feel every second stretching longer beside his father. He hated moments like this. The looks, the silence, the way adults smiled at each other without actually smiling. Daniel sat with his large hands folded calmly over Ethan's progress report, saying nothing while fluorescent light reflected faintly off the old silver watch on his wrist. The watch looked heavy, scratched along the edges, older than Ethan himself. One of the fathers near the window glanced at it twice before looking away again. Mrs. Collins clicked her pen against a clipboard. "I always tell parents that children mirror discipline," she said. "Strong routines create strong futures." Her eyes drifted toward Daniel once more. "That includes punctuality, presentation, and consistency." A mother near the front shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Another parent pretended to read the handout in front of them. Ethan wished they would move on to another student already, but Rebecca seemed almost energized by the tension hanging in the room. Daniel finally opened Ethan's folder and quietly studied the papers inside. He nodded once to himself, almost thoughtfully, before placing the report back together with careful precision. Not rushed, not careless. Every edge lined up perfectly. Mrs. Collins noticed it too. "Mr. Walker," she said, her tone sharpening slightly, "do you have any concerns about Ethan's recent classroom behavior?" Daniel looked up. "Like what?" "He has become more withdrawn over the last few months. Distracted, tired sometimes." She paused. Deliberately. Children usually reflect the environment around them. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Daniel remained still for a moment before answering. "I will talk with him." That was it. No excuses. No argument. Just calm acceptance. Somehow that seemed to frustrate Rebecca even more. She crossed her arms tighter. "Well, communication at home is important, especially for boys his age. They need stability from father figures." Ethan lowered his eyes again. The words felt heavier now because everyone understood what she was implying. Daniel slowly leaned back in the folding chair, the metal creaking softly beneath his weight. "You are probably right," he said quietly. His voice stayed level, controlled, almost detached, like someone who had learned a long time ago not to waste energy proving himself to strangers. The gray-haired father near the window kept watching Daniel carefully. Former military, maybe. There was recognition in his expression now. Tiny details beginning to connect. Daniel's posture never slouched despite the hard chair. His eyes constantly scanned the room without appearing to move much. Even the way he sat seemed deliberate, with a clear line of sight toward the hallway entrance. Rebecca turned toward Ethan again. "Your son is very polite," she admitted, "but he rarely talks about home. Or about you." Ethan immediately looked toward his father, worried that might upset him somehow. It did not. Daniel only rested one hand lightly against Ethan's shoulder. "That is okay," he said. "Kids should get to be kids." The sentence landed differently than Rebecca expected. Softer. Heavier somehow. The room became quiet again except for the low buzz from the ceiling lights and distant thunder rolling across the parking lot outside. Then a sudden crack of laughter echoed from the hallway beyond the classroom door, and several parents flinched slightly at the noise. Daniel did not. Not even a blink. The gray-haired father noticed that too. His eyes narrowed harder now. Rebecca exhaled slowly through her nose before forcing another professional smile. "Well," she said, gathering her papers together, "hopefully Ethan can develop stronger confidence. Moving forward." Daniel gave a small nod. "He will." Rebecca started to respond, but her attention briefly caught on something hanging beneath Daniel's flannel collar. A thin silver chain. Old. Military style. Barely visible beneath the fabric before disappearing again. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered across her face. The atmosphere inside room 214 shifted almost invisibly after that. Nothing dramatic. No raised voices. No sudden confrontation. Just a strange heaviness settling across the classroom like pressure before a thunderstorm. Mrs. Collins shuffled papers across her desk while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but her rhythm was no longer smooth. She kept glancing toward Daniel Walker without meaning to. Ethan noticed it immediately. So did the gray-haired father near the window. Outside, headlights moved slowly through the rain-soaked parking lot, stretching pale reflections across the wet pavement. Somewhere down the hallway, a janitor pushed a rolling trash bin past the classrooms, the wheels rattling faintly against the tile floor. Daniel remained calm through all of it. He sat beside Ethan with the same steady posture, one boot planted slightly forward, eyes relaxed but alert beneath the tired lines around them. Rebecca cleared her throat and forced the meeting forward. Let us continue with attendance improvement plans for next semester. Her voice sounded thinner now, less certain. A mother near the front raised her hand politely. Ethan is always respectful when my son talks about him, she said carefully. Very mature for his age. Rebecca nodded quickly. Yes, Ethan is polite. Then she added, almost automatically, children often become quiet when they carry stress from home. Ethan's jaw tightened. Daniel slowly turned his head toward Rebecca for the first time that evening, not angry, not offended, simply looking at her with calm attention that somehow made the room feel even quieter. Ma'am, he said softly, my son is doing his best. The sentence was simple, honest, but the way he said it stopped several people from moving at all. No bitterness, no shame, just certainty. Rebecca folded her arms again. And children deserve support systems that encourage confidence. Daniel gave one small nod. I agree. Ethan stared at his father in confusion. Most people argued when they were insulted. Most people defended themselves. Daniel never did. He just absorbed the moment without changing expression, like rain hitting stone. Then one of the parents near the back leaned toward Ethan with a friendly smile, clearly trying to break the tension. So what does your dad do, buddy? Ethan hesitated. He fixes engines. Cars. Mostly diesel trucks. Daniel stayed silent beside him. The parent nodded politely, but the gray-haired father near the window kept studying Daniel more carefully now. His eyes dropped briefly to Daniel's hands, then to the old watch, then to the slight scar near his wrist again. Recognition was building slowly behind his face. Ethan looked down at his sneakers. My dad wakes up really early, he added quietly before he could stop himself. Like 4:30 every morning. A few parents smiled faintly. That is discipline, one mother joked softly. Ethan nodded. He folds all the blankets perfectly too, like corners really tight. Daniel glanced toward Ethan, almost embarrassed by the attention. Buddy. But Ethan kept talking now, unaware that the room had become completely focused on him. And he always sits facing doors in restaurants. Silence followed. Even Rebecca paused. Ethan frowned slightly as he realized everyone was listening. He also hates fireworks, he said more quietly. Daniel lowered his eyes toward the floor for just a second. Barely noticeable, but the gray-haired father saw it. His expression changed immediately. Not curiosity anymore. Something else. Something heavier. Respect maybe. He leaned back slowly in his chair and looked at Daniel again with new understanding. Rebecca noticed the shift, but did not understand it yet. She straightened a stack of papers nervously. Well, she said, forcing another smile. Many people develop habits over time. But her voice lacked confidence now. Daniel reached down and adjusted Ethan's backpack upright beside the chair. The movement pulled his flannel sleeve back slightly farther than before, revealing part of an old faded tattoo near his forearm. Black ink, worn by time, almost impossible to read beneath the classroom lights. Almost. The gray-haired father suddenly stopped breathing for half a second. His eyes locked onto the tattoo. Then very quietly, almost under his breath, he whispered, "No way." The whisper barely carried across the room, but Daniel heard it. His eyes lifted slowly toward the gray-haired father near the window. The man looked stunned now, staring at the faded tattoo near Daniel's forearm like he had seen a ghost sitting inside Lincoln Elementary School. Rainwater rolled down the classroom windows in crooked streams while the fluorescent lights hummed overhead with that cold mechanical sound that suddenly felt much louder than before. Mrs. Collins noticed the silence spreading again. Is there a problem? She asked carefully. The gray-haired father blinked once before answering. No, he said slowly. I just thought I recognized something. Daniel calmly adjusted his sleeve back down, covering the tattoo completely. Probably not, he replied. His tone remained polite, but final. The man nodded quietly, though he clearly did not believe him. Ethan looked between them in confusion. Rebecca forced another tight smile and clapped her hands lightly together. All right, everyone, let us stay focused. Papers shuffled. Chairs creaked softly. But the atmosphere had changed now. Several parents kept stealing glances toward Daniel when they thought he was not looking. Rebecca moved toward the whiteboard again, though her confidence was beginning to crack beneath the surface. As educators, she said, we try to identify influences that shape a child's emotional development. She paused beside Ethan's desk chart pinned near the board. Some children struggle to feel secure when authority at home is inconsistent. Daniel finally looked directly at her again. Not aggressively, not offended, just still. That same unreadable calm. Ma'am, he said quietly, if you have concerns about my son, you can speak to me directly. The room froze for a second. Rebecca straightened slightly. I am speaking generally. It does not sound general. Her jaw tightened. Ethan immediately looked nervous again, expecting an argument now, but Daniel's voice never rose even slightly. That somehow made it worse for her. There was no anger to push against, no weakness to expose, just composure. Outside the classroom, thunder rolled low across the night sky. Then footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway. Heavy, quick, purposeful. A moment later, Principal Howard Green appeared at the open classroom door holding a folder beneath one arm. Mid-50s, tall, former football coach build, usually relaxed. Tonight, he looked distracted, like he had been dealing with problems all evening. Sorry to interrupt, he said, stepping inside. Just needed the attendance reports from tonight. Rebecca immediately shifted into a professional tone. Of course. Howard nodded politely toward the parents while she searched through papers at her desk. Then his eyes landed on Daniel Walker. He stopped moving completely. Not dramatic, just sudden stillness. His expression changed in a way only a few people noticed at first. Confusion, recognition, then something very close to disbelief. Daniel looked back at him calmly. Neither man spoke for a second. The rain outside seemed louder again. Howard slowly lowered the folder in his hands. Daniel, he asked quietly. Ethan turned toward his father. Rebecca frowned slightly. Daniel gave a small nod. Evening, Howard. The principal stared at him harder now, almost studying his face beneath the harsh classroom lights. I have not seen you in. He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes drifted briefly toward Daniel's wrist where the tattoo had disappeared moments earlier beneath the flannel sleeve. Howard's face lost color almost immediately. Rebecca noticed it this time. Principal Green? Howard did not answer right away. He looked back at Daniel again, lowering his voice instinctively. You were with 2nd Battalion. Not a question. Daniel remained still. Long time ago. Howard swallowed once. Around the room, several parents exchanged confused looks. Rebecca forced a nervous laugh. Wait, you two know each other. Howard ignored her completely. His attention never left Daniel now. I heard you moved. Out west after. He stopped himself again. Daniel gave one slight nod. For a while. The principal stared another second before quietly closing the classroom door behind him. The click of the latch sounded strangely loud in the silence. Then Howard looked at Daniel Walker with an expression that no longer resembled casual recognition at all. It looked like respect. No one inside room 214 seemed comfortable breathing too loudly anymore. The fluorescent lights continued their low electric buzz overhead while rain rolled steadily against the dark classroom windows, but the entire atmosphere had shifted into something tense and unfamiliar. Principal Howard Green stood near the closed door staring at Daniel Walker with visible disbelief, the attendance folder hanging forgotten at his side. Mrs. Collins looked back and forth between them, trying to understand why the confident tone she had controlled all evening suddenly no longer worked. Howard, she asked carefully, what is going on? The principal did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Daniel like he was trying to confirm something impossible. Daniel stayed seated beside Ethan, calm as ever, one hand resting lightly against the boy's backpack. It is fine, Daniel said quietly. You do not need to make this awkward. Howard gave a short breath that almost sounded like nervous laughter. Awkward, he repeated softly. Daniel, half the men from our county who served overseas knew your name. Several parents exchanged confused glances. Rebecca frowned. I am sorry, what exactly are we talking about here? Howard finally looked toward the room. You really do not know who he is? Daniel lowered his eyes slightly, clearly uncomfortable with where this conversation was heading. Howard, but the principal shook his head slowly. No, I should have recognized you the second I walked in. The gray-haired father near the window quietly leaned forward now, completely focused. Ethan looked between the adults with growing confusion. Dad, Daniel gave him a small, reassuring nod. It is nothing important, buddy. Howard stared at him in disbelief again. Nothing important, he repeated under his breath. Rain thundered harder outside for a moment, rattling against the glass, while somewhere down the hallway an old air vent hummed softly through the school ceiling. Then Howard spoke again, slower this time. Back in 2004, my younger brother was attached to a Marine convoy outside Fallujah. Several people in the room straightened slightly at the word. Howard continued carefully. Their route got compromised during a dust storm. Communications failed. Vehicles separated. Nobody could find the lead unit for hours. Daniel's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Ethan noticed it immediately. Howard looked at him with deep respect now. My brother told me later there was one staff sergeant keeping that entire convoy together while visibility dropped to almost nothing. Daniel remained silent. Said the man never panicked once. Just kept moving truck by truck through the storm, making sure everybody got out. Rebecca's confident posture faded completely now. Wait, she whispered. Howard nodded slowly without taking his eyes off Daniel. The story spread through half the state after those guys came home. Ethan stared at his father in complete shock. You were a Marine? Daniel exhaled quietly through his nose. Long time ago. Dad, why did you never say anything? Daniel looked at him gently. Because that is not the important part. The room stayed silent. Even Rebecca no longer seemed capable of speaking. Howard stepped a little closer now, lowering his voice instinctively like people do inside churches. My brother said there was one man everybody trusted when things went bad. His eyes settled fully on Daniel. They called him Raven 6. The gray-haired father near the window immediately looked down toward the faded tattoo Daniel had hidden beneath his sleeve earlier. Recognition hit him fully now. Ethan looked completely lost. Raven 6. Daniel rubbed one hand slowly across the back of his neck, clearly wanting the conversation to end. Just an old call sign. Howard shook his head once. Not to the men who served with you. Mrs. Collins swallowed hard. Her face had gone pale beneath the fluorescent lights. For the first time all evening, she looked genuinely nervous, sitting only a few feet away from the man she had spent the last hour quietly humiliating in front of his son. The silence inside the classroom no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt heavy. The kind of silence that changes how people sit, how they breathe, how they look at someone they thought they understood 5 minutes earlier. Rain continued streaking across the dark windows while fluorescent light washed the room in pale white shadows, and not a single parent seemed interested in the student reports anymore. Every eye remained fixed on Daniel Walker. Ethan stared at his father like he was seeing him for the first time in his life. You were really a Marine? He asked quietly again. Daniel gave a small nod. A long time ago. Why did you never tell me? Daniel looked down at him gently. Because being your father matters more. The answer landed harder than anything else said that night. Across the room, Mrs. Collins lowered herself slowly into her chair behind the desk. Her posture had completely changed now. The sharp confidence from earlier was gone, replaced by uncertainty she could not hide anymore. Principal Green remained standing near the door. Daniel never talked about himself even back then. He said quietly to the room. That was part of why people respected him. Daniel rubbed his thumb slowly against the edge of Ethan's backpack strap, clearly wanting the attention to end. But Howard was no longer speaking casually. There was weight in his voice now. Memory. My brother came home from overseas completely different, he continued. He barely spoke about any of it for years. But one name always came up eventually. His eyes settled on Daniel again. Raven 6. The gray-haired father near the window nodded slowly under his breath. I knew I recognized that tattoo. Rebecca looked between them carefully. What does that even mean? Howard answered without looking away from Daniel. It means people trusted him when things got bad. The rain outside softened slightly, turning into a low, steady hiss against the parking lot, while distant thunder rolled farther away now. Somewhere down the hallway a locker door slammed shut, making several parents jump slightly. Daniel did not react at all. The gray-haired father noticed that too. You still do it, he murmured. Daniel frowned faintly. Do what? Track every sound in the room. Daniel gave a tired half-smile. Old habits. Rebecca swallowed hard. The pieces were beginning to rearrange themselves in her mind now. The posture, the scars, the silence, the calm. None of it looked accidental anymore. Ethan sat completely still beside his father. Dad, he said softly, is that why you hate fireworks? Daniel hesitated for the first time all evening. Just a second. Sometimes loud noises stick with people. Ethan nodded slowly, trying to process everything. Howard glanced toward Rebecca's desk before lowering his voice further. You know General Arthur Hayes? Several parents immediately recognized the name. Even Rebecca straightened slightly. Retired 4-star Marine Corps general. National news interviews. Veterans foundations. Public ceremonies. Howard looked back at Daniel. His son was attached to my brother's convoy during that storm. Daniel's expression tightened almost invisibly. Howard. But the principal continued anyway. My brother told me Hayes never forgot who got those men home safely. The room went dead quiet again. Rebecca stared at Daniel in complete disbelief now. Earlier that evening she had looked at his oil-stained jacket and late arrival and decided exactly what kind of man he must be. Now every assumption she made felt painfully exposed beneath the cold classroom lights. Daniel slowly stood from his folding chair at last, tall and steady, pulling his old work jacket back over his shoulders. The movement revealed just a glimpse of the worn silver chain beneath his collar again before it disappeared. Ethan, he said gently, we should head home. But before Ethan could stand, Principal Green spoke again. Daniel, does Hayes still keep in touch with you? Daniel paused beside the chair. His eyes drifted briefly toward the rain-covered windows. Sometimes. Howard stared at him for one long second, then slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The moment Principal Green unlocked his phone, the entire room became unnaturally still. Rain whispered against the windows. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere far down the hallway, a cleaning cart rattled briefly before fading away again. Daniel Walker stood beside Ethan with his old denim jacket hanging open slightly at the collar, one weathered hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Howard, he said quietly, do not do this. But the principal already had the phone pressed to his ear. I just need to confirm something. Rebecca Collins watched with growing anxiety from behind her desk. Earlier that evening, she had spoken to Daniel like he was an irresponsible mechanic embarrassing his son in front of the class. Now even looking at him directly seemed difficult for her. Howard turned slightly away as the line connected. Sir, he said carefully after a moment. I apologize for the late hour. The room stayed silent enough that several parents could hear the faint voice speaking through the receiver, though not clearly enough to understand the words. Howard glanced toward Daniel again. Yes, sir. He is here. Daniel closed his eyes briefly like a man already exhausted by where this was heading. Ethan looked up at him in confusion. Dad. Daniel gave him a faint smile. It is all right, buddy. Howard listened another second before straightening almost immediately. Yes, sir, he said firmly. Understood. Then he lowered the phone slowly from his ear and stared at Daniel with open disbelief. He is coming. Daniel exhaled quietly through his nose. Several parents looked at one another nervously. Rebecca frowned. Who is coming? Howard answered without hesitation. General Arthur Hayes. The room went completely silent. One mother actually covered her mouth in shock. The gray-haired father near the window leaned back slowly in his chair like the final missing piece had just fallen into place. Ethan looked completely lost. The general? Howard nodded carefully, still staring at Daniel. Retired 4-star Marine Corps general. Rebecca's face drained of color beneath the fluorescent lights. Why would someone like that come here? No one answered immediately. Daniel adjusted Ethan's backpack strap gently onto the boy's shoulder. Howard, he said quietly, this is unnecessary. The principal shook his head at once. No, sir. I do not think it is. The word sir hung heavily in the room. Rebecca noticed that too. Everyone did. A school principal was calling the diesel mechanic in the worn jacket sir. Outside the classroom windows, headlights suddenly swept across the rain-covered parking lot. Bright white beams cut through the darkness before disappearing again. Several parents instinctively turned toward the glass. Ethan stared up at his father again. You know a general? Daniel looked uncomfortable for the first time all night. A long time ago I worked with people. Howard almost laughed softly at the understatement. That is one way to say it. Rainwater rolled down the windows in silver streams, while thunder rumbled low in the distance again. Rebecca slowly stood from her desk, clearly unsure what to do with herself anymore. Mr. Walker, she said carefully, her voice far softer now. If I misunderstood anything earlier, Daniel looked toward her calmly. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. You judged me before you knew me, he said quietly. The sentence hit harder than shouting ever could have. Rebecca lowered her eyes immediately. Ethan stared at his father in silence. For years he had only known the quiet man who fixed trucks, folded blankets perfectly, and drank black coffee before sunrise every morning. Now every small habit suddenly felt connected to something much larger hiding beneath the surface. Then the sound arrived. Tires crunching slowly across wet gravel outside the school entrance. More than one vehicle. The headlights passing the classroom windows again, this time brighter and closer. Several parents stood halfway from their chairs without realizing it. Howard moved toward the window and looked outside. His posture instantly straightened. "Oh my God," he whispered under his breath. Two dark SUVs rolled through the rain toward the front entrance of Lincoln Elementary School. The sound of vehicle doors opening echoed faintly through the rain outside Lincoln Elementary School. Inside room 214, nobody moved. Parents sat frozen beneath the fluorescent lights while water streaked slowly down the classroom windows, distorting the dark shapes parked near the entrance. Principal Green stepped away from the glass with visible tension in his face. "They are here," he said quietly. Rebecca Collins looked like she had forgotten how to speak. Daniel Walker stood beside Ethan with the same calm expression he had worn all evening, one hand resting lightly against the strap of his old denim jacket. "This is getting out of hand," he murmured. Howard shook his head immediately. "No, sir." Respectfully, it already was. Footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. Slow. Controlled. More than one set. Ethan could hear the faint squeak of wet shoes against tile before the classroom door finally opened. Two men in dark suits stepped inside first, scanning the room automatically before moving aside. Then General Arthur Hayes entered behind them. Even at his age, the man carried himself with unmistakable authority. Tall, silver hair cut short, dark overcoat still damp from the rain. The room instinctively straightened before anyone even realized they were doing it. Rebecca stood so quickly her chair nearly tipped backward. Ethan stared wide-eyed. He had seen the general on television before. Memorial Day speeches, national interviews, veteran ceremonies. None of it prepared him for seeing the man walk directly into his elementary school classroom. General Hayes ignored everyone else completely. His eyes locked onto Daniel Walker the second he stepped inside. For a moment, neither man spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the school building, an old pipe groaned faintly. Then the general crossed the room. Every parent watched in complete silence as a retired four-star Marine general stopped directly in front of the diesel mechanic in the worn jacket. Daniel looked uncomfortable already. "Arthur," he said quietly, "you really did not have to come." General Hayes stared at him for one long second before answering. "Yes," he said firmly, "I did." Then, in front of the entire room, the general straightened his posture sharply and raised his hand in a formal salute. Nobody breathed. Ethan's eyes widened completely. Principal Green lowered his head slightly with quiet respect. The gray-haired father near the window stared in stunned silence. And Mrs. Rebecca Collins looked like the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Daniel hesitated before returning the salute with calm precision, the movement smooth and automatic despite the years that had passed. The room remained frozen even after both men lowered their hands. General Hayes turned slightly toward Ethan then. "You must be his son." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." A faint smile touched the general's face. "Your father is one of the finest men I have ever known." Ethan looked up at Daniel again, almost unable to process the words. Hayes glanced around the classroom after that, his expression hardening just slightly as he sensed the tension lingering beneath the surface. "I received a concerning phone call from Principal Green," he said calmly. Nobody answered. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly at her sides. The general looked toward her directly now. Not cruel, not angry, just direct enough to make the silence feel unbearable. "Do you know why many veterans never discuss their service?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "No, sir." Hayes nodded once. "Because the best among them do not need applause." His eyes shifted back toward Daniel. Men like him carried responsibility quietly long after everybody else stopped watching. Daniel exhaled softly, clearly wishing the moment would end. "Arthur." But the general ignored the interruption. The man standing in this classroom once protected young Marines during conditions most people could not imagine. The room remained completely still, including my son. Rebecca's eyes filled instantly. Ethan stared at his father in total disbelief now. Daniel simply looked down for a second, uncomfortable beneath the attention. Then he said the same quiet sentence he had repeated all night. It was a long time ago. General Hayes looked at him carefully before answering. Honor does not expire with time, Daniel. Nobody inside room 214 spoke for several long seconds after General Hayes finished talking. Rain continued falling softly outside Lincoln Elementary School while pale fluorescent light reflected across the classroom floor, and the silence no longer carried tension now. It carried something else entirely. Respect. Daniel Walker stood quietly beside Ethan with his old denim jacket still damp near the shoulders, looking more uncomfortable with attention than proud of it. General Hayes lowered his hand slowly after the salute and studied him carefully. You still disappear whenever people thank you, the general said with a faint smile. Daniel gave a tired shrug. Some things do not change. A few soft laughs finally broke the silence in the room, but even those sounded careful now. Ethan looked up at his father with wide eyes, still trying to connect the quiet man who repaired diesel engines before sunrise with the Marine everyone else suddenly seemed to honor. Dad, he said softly, you really saved people? Daniel looked down at him for a moment before answering. A lot of people took care of each other. But General Hayes said. Daniel gently rested his hand on Ethan's shoulder again. The important thing is that everybody came home. The simplicity of the answer seemed to affect the room more than any dramatic story could have. Principal Green lowered his eyes briefly with quiet admiration. The gray-haired father near the window nodded slowly to himself. And Mrs. Rebecca Collins looked completely shattered by the realization of how badly she had misjudged the man standing in front of her. She stepped forward carefully now, her voice barely steady. Mr. Walker. Daniel. He looked toward her calmly. Rebecca swallowed hard before speaking again. I owe you an apology. Nobody moved. Tonight I assumed things about you that were unfair. Her eyes drifted briefly toward Ethan. And I am deeply sorry for the way I spoke in front of your son. Daniel remained quiet for a second while rain tapped softly against the windows behind him. Then he nodded once. Thank you. No anger. No humiliation returned to her. Just quiet acceptance. Somehow that made Rebecca's eyes fill even more. General Hayes watched the exchange silently before glancing toward Ethan again. Your father spent his whole life protecting people without asking for recognition, he said gently. Do not ever mistake silence for weakness. Ethan nodded slowly, holding on to every word. Outside, the rain had finally started easing into a soft mist, and the parking lot lights reflected in long silver streaks across the wet pavement beyond the classroom windows. Daniel looked toward the door at last. Come on, buddy, he said softly. Let us head home. Ethan grabbed his backpack quickly and moved beside him, but this time something felt completely different. As Daniel walked toward the classroom door, every parent instinctively stepped aside to make room. Nobody planned it. Nobody discussed it. It simply happened. Quietly. Naturally. Respectfully. Rebecca stood near her desk with tears still in her eyes while Daniel passed by her. Good night, Mrs. Collins, he said politely. She lowered her head slightly. Good night, Mr. Walker. General Hayes watched Daniel and Ethan move down the hallway together beneath the pale school lights, the boy staying close beside his father now with unmistakable pride shining across his face. Halfway down the corridor, Ethan looked up one more time. Dad, yeah. I think everybody was scared of you. Daniel smiled faintly for the first time all night. No, he said softly. They just finally understood. The two figures disappeared toward the front entrance while rainwater dripped steadily from the roof outside, and the old American flag near the parking lot shifted gently in the cold night wind. Back inside room 214, nobody spoke for a very long time. Because sometimes the loudest kind of honor arrives without noise at all. And sometimes the strongest men are the ones who never feel the need to remind anyone who they are.